Namaste everyone. Welcome to The Sensual and the Sublime, a 6-part series on the contemplative arts of yoga. I'm your host, Dr. Praveena Rodriguez. I am faculty at Starr King School for the Ministry in Oakland, California, and postdoctoral fellow at the Jesuit School of Theology of Santa Clara University in Berkeley, California. We have a very special guest today. We have the pleasure of speaking with Pandit Naren Kamalakanta Schreiner, who will be talking to us today on the topic of sonic theology in ancient India. Pandit Schreiner has been a disciple of Paramhansa Yogananda and the Kriya Yoga lineage for over 20 years. He is a Hindu priest at the Kali Mandir Temple in LA and serves as a spiritual advisor for several organizations in America and Mexico. Sacred music is an integral part of his life and worship. He travels frequently to teach, inspire, and support seekers in the yogic and worship traditions of Sanatana Dharma. Welcome, Panditji. It's good to see you again.
Thank you.
Panditji will be in conversation with Dr. Rita Sherma. Dr. Sherma is founding director and associate professor at the Center for Dharma Studies, co-doctoral faculty, department chair of theology and ethics, and co-chair of Sustainability 360 Initiative at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California. Formerly, she was the Swami Vivekananda Visiting Professor in Hindu Studies at USC Los Angeles. Dr. Sherma is co-founder of the American Academy of Religion's Hinduism Program Unit. She is the founding vice president of the Dharma Academy of North America, which is a scholarly society for research on Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain religious studies. She also serves as Vice President of the Society for Hindu-Christian Studies. She has authored, edited, and co-edited numerous books. I will not attempt to list all of those here, but most importantly, she is the founding editor-in-chief of the Journal of Dharma Studies. Welcome, Dr. Sherma. So it's really wonderful to have you both here, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. The structure for today's event is, first I have a couple of questions for you, Dr. Sherma. It's basically related to this project, and here. But most importantly, she is the... And after that, I will let you two talk among yourselves about sonic theology in ancient India for about 45 minutes. So first, let me begin by asking you, Dr. Sherma, about the genesis of this project. You are also teaching a course at the GTU with the same title, The Sensual and the Sublime, the Contemplative Arts of Yoga. So what I want to ask you is, what do you mean by the contemplative arts of yoga?
Thank you very much, Dr. Rodriguez, and thank you for convening this meeting and starting our 6-part series. The brief background of the project is that it builds on another affiliated project, which was in the 2022 cycle, and it's called Contemplative Consciousness and Cognitive Studies in Yoga. And it's an advanced program that offers various different components. And it was made possible with the support of the Oberoi Foundation for the Religions of India. The project also involves the course that you mentioned, which is a PhD seminar, and the compilation of a new volume that is part of a series. The series is known as Contemplative Studies in Dharma by Routledge, and the first volume is already published. The title of this first volume that's already available is Contemplative Studies and Hinduism, Meditation, Devotion, Prayer, and Worship. The second volume in this series is Contemplative Studies in Jainism. And the third volume, which is what this particular part of the project is involved with, is titled Contemplative Studies and the Arts of Yoga, again, Routledge series. which I will be editing with Professor Devashish Banerjee. This whole project includes many different components, and including, of course, the series of books, the course Substantial and the Sublime, the Contemplative Arts of Yoga, and the series of interviews. It also includes other research and publication that explores yogic, contemplative arts and aesthetic practices. And the project basically asks this question: how can we draw inspiration from the meaning inherent in diverse yogic arts, performative arts, and fine arts, either done by an individual or done in community liturgically, and in a communitarian way. And these involve such a broad spectrum. It involves dhyana, and that's meditation, but it may involve meditation amongst forests and flora, in mountains or in sacred spaces and sacred groves. It also involves the arts of yantra and pūja and kathā, kīrtana, Sangeet, and sacred movement, various sacred dances, as well as sacramental arts and aesthetics such as rangoli, yantra, and maṇḍala creation by the performer, by the spiritual seeker themselves. It could be anyone who is involved in the contemplative practice. This, in the Hindu world, the world that arises the headwaters of the Vedas and flows with many tributaries coming into this river till today, this is not a world that is entirely textual. The text is experienced and embodied. The text is heard through sacred sound. The text is touched through the use of various things like sandalwood paste or vermilion, flowers, and the text is visualized through yantras and through icons. So it's a very sensorial experience of the sublime. And that's why the sensual becomes a pathway to the sublime. And so all of these things, the sacred movements, the sacramental arts, the aesthetics, and the sacred sound is key. And amongst all of these, sacred sound is so important in the Hindu world that scripture itself is known as the epistemology of sound. It's known as Shabda Pramana. Pramana Vada is the epistemology in the Hindu world. And Shabda literally means sound. And so we mean the testimony of the wise, the testimony of enlightened beings. And the Shabda Pramana refers to the revelation that is available in scripture, but that is not just read, but that is heard, and that is recited, that is sung, and that is vibrational in its power as mantra. So there's also a further element of this project, and that is the application to foster the study of a yogic eco-psychology and through the eco-praxis for healing through the connection with the elements of the natural world cultivated through these contemplative arts of yoga, to provide pathways to integrate yogic contemplative approaches to address climate trauma and ecological anxiety.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma. I think you touched a little bit upon what my next question was going to be about sonic theology. So today, Pandit Schreiner is going to be talking to us about sonic theology in ancient India. Can you talk to us a little bit more about what you mean by sonic theology?
This term sonic theology arises from a famous book by Professor Guy Beck, and he talks about it very well in this text. But the idea of sonic theology is across this tradition in a very powerful way. And it begins really with the Rig Veda and the development of Sanskrit from a spoken language of a people to a very sophisticated development of it to hold the sacred revelation of the Rig Veda. And so accentation, rhythm, metric, all of this arises as a result of this need. And then when the Samaveda, the second Veda, Samhita, Samaveda Samhita, a very large portion of it are the verses of the Rig Veda, the kavita, the sacred poetry of the Rig Veda turns into actual hymns, sama, song, in the Rig Veda, in the Samaveda. That is really the roots of Indian classical music. Indian music as a whole has therefore a sacred root, a sacred ground. And when theology is heard through this kind of sacred music, it becomes sonic theology.
Thank you, Dr. Sherma. So I will let you two talk a little bit more about sonic theology and this topic that we are here to discuss, Dr. Sherma, and over to you.
Thank you. Narenji, it's a pleasure to see you. Namaskar.
Namaskar. Wonderful to see you.
Wonderful to see you. And I would like to ask you, what I asked you many years ago is that I think we have the concept of recitation of scripture in many different traditions. We have it in Buddhism, we have it definitely in Judaism, we have it in Islam and other traditions. But the concept of mantra as an entire text as a mantra is there in very few traditions, and they are dharmic traditions, but it is absolutely ubiquitous everywhere in the Hindu tradition. How does the text as mantra function as a performative contemplation, as a meditation?
Well, as you introduced the Samaveda and Rig Veda, that's really where it begins as far as a written textual reference. But as a tradition that revolves around sound and vibration, both ritual and any kind of contemplative practice goes hand in hand with the voice as the human experience. And later, of course, you have other types of instruments, but really with the voice, which is the most intimate experience of sound that we have as human beings. And so voice is at the core of Samaveda, even of Rig Veda, because there's no such thing in that dharma context of a ritual without chanting. It can't happen. They're linked together, and therefore music that we know of in India and all of its variety has its roots in that intimate experience of sound, both in the production of sound that we have in our voice, which is a very powerful tool, as we know, for speech, but also for song. Recitation is something that can become verbal, and maybe these days we think of it as reading something out loud, like reciting just verbally. I have often said to others who are reading the Bhagavad Gita, for example, we call it in English the song of the Lord. And we may think song, and then it's read as a text. And when it says Arjuna Uvacha or Sri Bhagavan Uvacha, or in any of the scriptures, when we see that word Uvacha, many Westerners will, and contemporary minds will think, oh, the Lord said. And we think it's spoken as a conversation that we're having now. But Uvacha can also be chanted. It can be vocalized. Probably that's more accurate, is to say vocalized. Because so much of what was sacred and so much what was in that category of divine or otherworldly was not spoken in just normal words. It was sung, chanted melodically, hoping to connect to that Nāda Brahma, that Shabda Brahma, that sacred sound, both as a creative principle, a vibratory, but also as this instrument of vibration that we have in our being, that we can produce vibration and express with it. And so that's really at the core of the internal religious, spiritual experience, even the cosmology, the devotion. So much is rooted in that.
This vibration as a doorway, as a portal to the divine. It seems to me that it is there in several core principles in Hindu theology. You mentioned Nāda Brahman. There's also the concept of spanda in Shaivism, in Trika, for example, which means pulsation. It's a vibration that the heart of the divine is vibrating. And it's through the vibration that the world is created. And we have the idea of Brahma chanting the Vedas in 4 directions, or chanting Om in 4 directions. And that this chant, which is a vibration, gives rise to the cosmos. So it's almost as if this vibration of the cosmos is something that we are expected to bridge ourselves to through, as you said, the vibration from our own capacity. But isn't it more than just any vibration? And this is a very important question, because a lot of students of sacred chant in the Vedic tradition, Sanskrit chant and Sanskrit recitation, ask me this question, and I'm sure you are asked all the time, is, does my pronunciation matter? And of course, there's 2 answers to that, but I want you to respond.
All right. Yes, I do get that question a lot. I myself have worked very hard at the pronunciation, partly for my own respect for the tradition, being not being born in that language, wanting to really be respectful. Also, I have good teachers who helped me, but I also really wanted to experience it. And again, that comes back to what is so central in the performance, when we use that word performing, like performing music, or we have that word for performing a puja, performing a ritual, performing a sacred dance. But in that doing of that, the goal in the mind and in the heart of the performer is a internal experience primarily. So the first answer to that is, will my pronunciation change my own experience? Because one of it is, what is its external effect? So if that vibration is being chanted and projecting out to influence or to affect nature or to our surroundings, or if we're trying to communicate with another person, it's very important, pronunciation, but also as an internal experience of vibration. And that, again, is that play of the esoteric sound, of the effect that those sounds have on our being, And in that case, yes, I would say yes, pronunciation is important, because the sounds that we're producing with our mouth are trying to correspond to centers of vibration and receptors almost of whether it's the chakras or the nadis. And so there's a resonance with those sounds, the matrikas, these vibrational resonances that we have in our being. But there's another element of bhav, which is the mood, the emotional feeling experience of consciousness that can happen with or without correct pronunciation. To communicate, however, to another person, pronunciation, of course, is very important. And one of my students, conveniently, her name was Denise, and this worked out quite well because she was very adamant that pronunciation does not matter. And it was very difficult for her to pronounce, and I understand why, because I myself have really studied the diction and why it's difficult for some people and easier for others. But at one point, to make my point, I started to call her Dennis. And at one point she stopped and she said, "Why are you calling me Dennis?" And I said, "What does it matter? I mean, I'm treating you the same way. My feelings haven't changed, you know." And then she got the point that the difference between Dennis and Denise for her meant her name or some man named, and even the gender shifted. So in that sense, to communicate, yes, it's important. And because a lot of these songs or texts are part of a communal experience, they communicate a teaching, they communicate experience. So that's why there are two answers, because there are times where, yes, it's important and it's worth the effort. There are other times where the personal experience and the bhav it seems to be independent of pronunciation.
When you bring the concept of bhav or bhava, we're talking about a certain orientation of the heart and mind. We can translate it in English as mood, but it is a very inadequate translation, but it's all we've got. And, I wanted to talk to you about, segue from your mentioning of bhava to the concept of bhakti, because I think that what you're telling us is that what is your intention in the performance of this sound act? If the intention is to communicate something to someone, then yes, pronunciation matters. But at a deeper level also, it matters, because the different pronunciations, and not just pronunciation, but also the rhythm and the metric that you use to pronounce, the accentation, all of this affects the vibration. So I know, I'm a French speaker. I grew up in French Canada, and I still am horrified when people say W-E-B, du bois, and when in French is du bois. And, I can feel the vibration in my throat change when I say that. Now, the thing is this, that you brought up nadis, you brought up chakras. So the sound vibrations are also grounded in a kind of a science of energy, of embodiment, that that we see this in Ayurveda, but we see that it arises from completely different places. It arises from theology, and particularly it arises from tantric theology, and particularly Shakta Tantra, the theology of the great goddess, the cosmic mother, and it ends up through Tibetan Buddhism, Vajrayana, into China, and influences acupuncture. And almost everyone's familiar with the Meridians of Acupuncture, and they're comfortable with it. And they go and get acupuncture when, they hurt their leg or something. But this is the same meridians almost that we're talking about that are affected by these sound vibrations when we wind our way back to the roots of those meridians which is, where you took us to. And I think it might go all the way back to the Atharva Veda, Yajur Veda, which is talking, when it begins to talk about all of the, energy, moving energy, affecting energy. And so, from what you say, we are tying in multiple things into the creation of sound. And so just to recap, you talked about the concept of the divine vibration and our vibration being a portal, a bridge to that divine vibration. You spoke about the effect of vibration when we recite, when we chant, when we sing a hymn, the effect of that vibration on our energy body, our energy field, these meridians of energy, nadis. And the final thing is, you mentioned bhava. Bhava is a mood, a feeling, a mellow kind of an attitude that is not quite emotion, but is impacted by emotion and gives rise to emotion. Right? So talk to us a little bit about what happens with the quality of sound when we move into the devotional orientation to the divine, that is Bhakti Yoga.
Bhakti Yoga really, musically speaking, Bhakti Yoga really peaked around the medieval times, partly because of a response to too much intellectuality that was happening in the religious landscape within India. So there was a number of bhaktas that arose in Bengal and all over. And a lot of it was already existing, it just peaked at that time. And bhakti, probably one of the most, I would say, distinguishing characteristics of bhakti is that the divine, that manifestation of God, of Brahman, is personalized. And so the concept of Ishtadevata becomes more prominent, where there's an actual form. So God is no longer abstract. So the form and the name of the divine, whether it's the Lord, is it Krishna or Shiva or Hanumanji, excuse me, is personal. And therefore the relationship that the bhakta has with that becomes in many ways more human. And therefore the scope of emotions also becomes human. And so the music takes a different turn in those traditions, but it's not only musical, it's also the repetition of the name. So the idea of japa yoga, of this repetition of a phrase, that is springing from concepts that have existed for a long time. Abhyasa yoga, just repetition. But in bhakti, the repetition will be, rather than the repetition of a particular energetic kriya or some practice, some action, the repetition will be of the name. And so Namasankirtan really emerged to just repeat the name. So rather than just saying a sacred mantra or a name over and over again, why not sing it? Sing it in various melodies that spring from the ragas, from the different rasas, and link that together with this wonderful tradition of rhythms and melodies. Then the experience is so powerful because sound connects with our emotions more than anything else. I know there's research about smell activating memory and things like this, but vibration, music affects our emotions. Everyone knows that. So how to use, it's very scientific, as you were saying, various shastras, in the Natya shastras, which is more focusing on dance and drama, this idea of rasa, of emotion, but the goal remains still to activate those certain emotions, or to transmute some existing emotion. So if someone is feeling sorrowful, for example, there are melodies and ragas and songs that will connect with that mood of sorrow. but where it becomes centered towards moksha, liberation, or divine communion, rather than just a sad song about life and remaining on the human interaction. It's directed to the Ishtadevata, to the personal. So that sorrow becomes a mood or a bhav, almost, a state of mind, a state of being of, I am longing, I am sorrowful for the divine. The only salve for my pain is God. But it's personal, it's not abstract. It doesn't work with an abstract, formless God, only personal. And so the Bhakti tradition has a very, very rich musical tradition with a lot of variety of beautiful poetry, beautiful imagery in many different categories. And also musically it's very diverse as well, to connect with the different emotions, the different rasas. And however, there's music in all parts, and that's something that I speak to often, because some, especially in the West, with some of the popularized kirtan, Western kirtan, Bhakti Fest and things, there's an assumption that Bhakti is the only devotional musical tradition, but you'll find music, sound, chanting in every single variation of Sanatana Dharma, of yoga, it's there. But yes, Bhakti has probably the richest, most diverse musical, sacred music tradition.
Talk to us a little bit about the different aspects of sacred music in the devotional tradition. So we talked about mantra. Now, the thing is, mantra is such a complex concept, and it's very unfortunate that it's entered the Western lexicon as just meaningless repetition. So someone will say, something is the mantra of this company, meaning its tagline, okay? And this is very, very unfortunate. But the thing is that mantra can be the auditory form, the auditory vibrational form of a devata, of a divine power. And it's not a signifier of that divine power. It is the divine power in that auditory form. And in Bhakti, we wouldn't say divine power, we would say divine being. But it is also every sacred text, because all significant sacred texts in the Hindu world are pretty much in verse. And so the recitation of anything that is, whether it is the glorification of the great goddess, the Devi Mahatmyam, Durga Saptasati, the Bhagavad Gita, the chanting of the Vedas, these are always in verse, and so they lead themselves to a particular, very specific rhythmic chanting. That is, in fact, the United Nations now has Vedic chanting as, and it's called intangible world heritage, which is very interesting. And very recently, this fall, I was delighted to find out that the United Nations, UNESCO has granted this kind of this title of intangible world heritage on Durga Puja, which is the great autumn festival of the Divine Mother. And that festival, as you know, is filled with mantra, but the mantra is the sacred text. It's her scripture. It's her canonical scripture. So there's also the sacred sound that comes from, you mentioned Sankirtan, and that is a call and response music. Maybe we can do a little bit of that so that those who are not familiar with it can get just a sense of it. I leave that to you. Then we have this other form, which is bhajan. Now, I particularly mention bhajan because it is said, or some scholars say, that bhajan democratizes the auditory connection to the sacred. Because a bhajan, you don't have to do it right. There's no right way to do it. The bhajan requires your heart is deeply flowing through it. It requires saridaya, the refined-hearted approach. And then we have very specific forms of music that are specific to Bhakti traditions, such as the one that you are very well known for, which is Shyama Sangeet, the Sangeet to the Divine Mother in her form as Kali. And I'm wondering if you would grace us with a small chant, or if possible, so that there's an ability for people to understand what this means and what it takes. Because really, that Shyama Sangeet, the Sangeet, the song of, it's really a song of surrender. And so I will leave you with those reflections and questions.
Thank you. It's such a vast subject, isn't it? It's hard it's extremely vast. So we're just really touching on just a little bit here and there. Yes, you said it so beautifully. The mantra is its form itself. There's so much intellectuality in contemporary religion and philosophy. And so oftentimes we think that every word has to have a meaning. And that is already a limitation, because mantra in many sounds, bija mantras and other mantras, don't mean anything. Om, if you look up Om in the dictionary, it can't tell you what it means. It just kind of tries to explain what it is or what it represents. And so, yes, a mantra can actually be the form. It is said that just saying the mantra is the audible sonic manifestation of that manifestation of Brahman, that deity or that divinity. And the rhythm that you spoke to also is so important. The chanda, the meter, I guess is the word in English. That's also very important for memorization, because remember, this is a 1000% oral tradition. It's not written, it's memorized. It's embodied and experienced. Probably, I'm not claiming I did any research on this, but my guess is that the auditory part of the brain was highly developed in that time, and much more so than now, because we may have a photographic memory with the eyes, but imagine having some type of an auditory memory where you could repeat by memory 3 hours worth of very complex texts and scriptures. One of the ways that it was memorized was with chanda, meter, and hand movements, and that ensured its preservation. One perspective within India is that the texts were written only to preserve something that already existed. It was there, very vibrant, in an oral tradition. And I will just chant so you can, to practice what I preach. Let's just listen to some examples rather than try to define it. I have here a Tanpura. This is a very simple invocation to Sri Ganesh, and there are many classifications within the tradition of different levels of expertise and authority. I have no claim on any being a ritvik of the Vedas, for example. They are of many generations have mastered the perfect pronunciation and chanting. But to the ability that I have learned for puja, particularly for rituals, this is one of the Vedic mantras, and it is fixed. A chant like this will not be sung melodically. These are the ones that come from those earlier Vedas that have many rules around it, to preserve its power, its original Shakti. Om Ganana Tva Ganapatingam Avamahe Kavim Kavinam Upamashravashtamam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspatana Shrinvannuti Visida Sadhanam. Om Shriman Mahaganadhipataye Namaha. So that sacred invocation to Ganesh is a very, very old, from the original Vedas. I don't remember which of the first three it is from. That chanda, you will hear it chanted like that everywhere. Before chanting Sri Rudram, it is fixed. Only 3 notes, which are explained in the Samaveda, these interval notes. Sa, sa, ni, sa, re, sa. Those 3 notes are used in these sacred chants, including of mantra and ancient texts. Some of the later texts, for example, Bhagavad Gita and many others, even parts of Chandi, will have that chanda. Usually before a text, part of its introduction names the composer, the deva, the inherent power, Shakti, the bija mantra, the kilakam, all of that of the text, and including the chanda. It will state what is the meter. So that is one way of identifying it. A very common meter, Anushtup chanda, has a certain number of syllables that's fixed, and that gives it a rhythm. Rhythm, we often forget that it's such an important part of music. And our rhythmic experience of music and popular music in the West is limited to about 2 rhythms. We have 4/4 time in various ways, accented in various ways, 4/4, or maybe a 3/4, kind of like a slower waltz-like time signature. Variations of that, but there's many, many, many more. And these rhythmic effects deal with the division of time and proportion on our being. Again, it influences us. So part of what rhythm can do is it can pull our consciousness with it. We feel it in the body, we respond to it. It can become a very useful tool into entering into altered states of consciousness, higher states of consciousness. What some people will call trance today, trance music, it's repetition. But in the yogic sciences and other types of sonic, like Nada Yoga, rhythm is important. So the meter is very important. So this is an example, just the first couple of verses from chapter 12 of Bhagavad Gita. And same notes, that sa, ne, sa, re, sa. But see if you can hear or feel a little bit of the consistency of the meter, which is defined by syllables. So if you want to just feel it, or if you want to try to count it on your fingers, the syllables in each verse, but primarily just to feel it. Om Shrimad Bhagavad Gitaya Namaha. Arjuna Uvacha Evam Satatayuktaye Bhaktatsvam Paryupasate Ye Chapyaksharama Vyaktam Tesham Ke Yoga Vittamaha. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Maya Vishya Mano Yemam Nitya Yukta Upasate Shraddhaya Parayopeta Te Me Yukta Tamamataha Ye Tvaksharamanirdesham Avyaktam Paryupasate Sarvatra Gama Chintancha Kuttastam Achalam Dhruvam Samniyam Yendriya Gramam Sarvatra Samabuddhaya Te Prapnuvanti Mameva Sarvabhuta Hite Rataha. So it continues like this, in this meter, in this chanda. The Bhagavad Gita at this pace, chanted in its entirety, will last about 3 hours, 3.5 hours, and this meter will only change in a couple of instances for emphasis. It will change. We have it in the Chandi, a well-known verse extracted from that Devi Mahatmyam. Same meter, same notes. Om Sarva Mangala Mangalye Shive Sarvartha Sadhike Sharanye Trambake Gauri Narayani Namostute Shristi Stiti Vinashanam Shakti Bhote Sanatani Gunashraye Gunamaye Narayani Namostute Sharanagata Dinartha Paritrana Parayane Sarvasyatri Hare Devi Narayani Namostute, and so on. From the influence of life, of the different performances, the growth of music, the transformations of music, the influences from the Mughal invasion brought some Persian music influences. Some of these sacred texts were then considered to be flexible enough, adaptive enough to be brought into a Gandharva Ved or musical, devotional, communal culture. So that some of them are untouchable. They have to stay in only a certain type of chanting, but some portions are extracted. So what I had just chanted now to some called pranam mantras or verses of praise. So in that sense, praise evokes various emotions, adoration and love and praise. So those can be sung in this way, same words, but now releasing the fix of melody and those three notes and of meter. Om Sarva Mangala Mangalye Shive Sarvartha Sadhike Sharanye Trayambake Gauri Narayani Namostute Shristi Stiti Vinashanam Shakti Bhote Sanatani Gunashraye Gunamaye Narayani Namostute, and so on. And that allows for the individual to express various emotions, also depending on the ritual that is taking place, the rasa, the flavor of that emotional experience, or the bhava, the overall state of being, of mind, of mood, they will interact with each other in a very beautiful way. So the science of sound and of melody, when we think even of soundtracks for a movie, you study film and they show one scene of just a open field and a fence and a gate that's partly open. You have one type of music from a psychological thriller or a horror picture. You're expecting something bad to happen. That field doesn't look like an inviting place. Similarly, you start to play happy music. You're waiting for something funny to happen, or it's a romance, etc. So that science was really detailed in Natya Shastras and other texts. So similarly, one who wants to have some variety will pull on these different melodies. So, for example, if I'm in a pūja and it's a temple, there are some times where the mood, and you know this so well, Dr. Sherma, from Durga Puja, for example, all of the moods where there's a longing, oh, Mother, please come to us. So maybe that same prayer that I had just sung will have a melody of evoking, maybe a tinge of sorrow, which musically might be in a minor key, or we'll have notes that evoke that emotion, that correspond with that emotion. That same chant at the end of a victory of the goddess when she destroys the demon, we may sing those same verses but in a different melody of joy and praise and celebration. Sometimes at night, in the darkness of night, in a more interiorizing sadhana, we will be singing in Bhairavi, a different mood that pulls the consciousness within rather than Om Sarvamangala Mangalye Shive Sarvartha Sadhike Sharanye Trayambake Gauri Narayani Namostute Shristi Sthiti Vinashanam Shakti Bhute Sanatani Gunashraye Gunamaye Narayane Namostute. So there's room for variation. And bhava is the emphasis. This general category could be considered Bhava Sangeet, where the bhav is most important. There are others in forms of music, we would call it rag sangeet, where the rag itself is fixed. And that is also a wonderful experience because we as listeners or as performers have to surrender to the mood and emotion of that raga. It imposes itself upon us and we surrender to it. But it takes us into an emotional experience that maybe we weren't used to, particularly with very ancient ragas. They are expressing a certain rasa or a certain bhav. And it's not Spotify. You cannot choose what you want to hear in that moment to correspond with how you feel. You kind of have to sit there, but if you're ready for it, then you surrender to it and it takes you into a experience that it has been created to do. It's a recipe, it's something that brings an experience. That will be rag sangeet, where that raga is the most important. And we fall into it, so to say, and there find a new emotional experience or a bhav. But in bhav, a beautiful thing that one of my Gurudevas, Paramahansa Yogananda, wrote, he said first, he was talking to a group of devotees in a meditative gathering. He said, first, feel what you are singing, and then sing what you are feeling. And it's so profound. It's not just a play of words. It's very profound, and it connects also to what the sacred music of India is. Behind it, there is a tremendous discipline and knowing of what the great tradition of it is. So in other words, first, feel what you are singing. It means first you have to learn the song. First you learn it, and you try to feel what it's trying to say to us. So rather than coming into it as a composer, you sort of come into it as a student, as a devotee of humility. Teach me this song. If it's a kirtan that someone is leading, I surrender myself to that leader. I want to go into that. But once you connect with what it is trying to convey, which is through the raga itself or through the words, through that experience, it then evokes a response within you, and suddenly it becomes individualistic. Then you are expected to then sing what you're feeling. And this is the beautiful play that in India's music traditions of structure and improvisation, of individualism plus group communality. It is magnificently balanced. It is really fascinating, and it's a whole other subject in itself. But in the devotional sense, to try to answer all of what you reflected on, that one part about where the rules seem to be transcended, where it's really what's important is the bhav. Yes, nothing touches my heart more and brings tears in my eyes when I hear a devotee, and it doesn't matter what country here, but I see it more often in India when I'm on pilgrimage. Someone by a temple, someone on the roadside, waiting for a bus to take them on pilgrimage or something. But really that they're not musically trained, not a cultivated voice, but pouring out the heart. And that, because the bhav is so irresistible, the devotion, the surrender, that it you can just tell, and that a lot of that comes from the meaning of the words. So that starts to get into almost another category of music, because they're going to be singing either simply the name, the divine name, or they will be singing words that they know what the meaning is. They'll be expressing a thought or feeling without any musicality at all. So that is also very much revered as a legitimate experience of music, performance, so to say, of music, because everyone knows that the audience is one. The audience is God. That person is not thinking of anyone else except God, and that is what kind of makes the tears flow, to see someone abandon themselves in a very vulnerable way, which is of singing. It's both vulnerable because it's so sacred. Singing is the scariest thing for most people to do, but how beautiful if you open your heart singing to such an extent that the only reality becomes the listener with a capital L, the divine, that everyone else around just happens to be there to witness. But it still comes back down to that original Samaveda Rigveda. That's a ritual. That is a ritual, that person is using sound and all of these foundational principles of sound, and they're using that to sing to God and to sing to the divine. And that is why music is just, you can't get away music is going to be, music and song are hand in hand with all of it. You cannot escape it. And so that is Bhava Sangeet. Absolutely, it's very, very important.
Can you complete that thought with the story of Tansen going to meet his guru?
Yeah. Yes, a very wonderful story, and an important time in history as well, because this is when one of the ancient words for a musician is Bhagavatar. Bhagavatar, one who sings to God, one who sings to the glories of the Lord Bhagwan. That was the term for a musician. That's all a musician was. It was doing that. And when the Mughal invasion happened in that period of time, a lot of the music was extracted, pulled into the courts, to the royal courts for entertainment. The livelihood and the people, the sort of the guild of these great musicians was tremendously threatened and devastated by this, because temple music became court music. In the royal court became the place where this music happened. Many of them had never sung to a person before. The performance was to the temple in those ancient times. Even the dance was being danced. Oh, to this day, it continues. But what's really wonderful about this is Akbar is the emperor, Mughal emperor, but he is born in India, so he had a tremendous influence of India and of Hinduism, and he was born there. And he wanted to have the authentic music tradition in his court. So he asked around and found a great student, and his name was Mian Tansen. Tansen, he's revered to this day, and he was like his court musician. He was, but at a very high position, because he represented all music. He was like in the cabinet, and he was the musical director. Many wonderful things have been written about Tansen, even him singing and changing the mood so dramatically of the court. He was had that much power. One day Akbar said, "I must meet your guru. If you can sing this way, let me meet your guru, your teacher." And Tansen said, "No, I don't think he will sing for you. I don't think it's worth the trip." But Akbar, the emperor, insisted, so he went with his whole retinue and brought Akbar to the village Myantan Sen's guru was Baba Haridas or Haridas Ji. His name, even in his name, we hear the sweetness of his countenance, but of that tradition. Hari being a name of the Lord or of Krishna, Das meaning servant, and Baba, affectionate term of a father. So he was a religious leader, not a musician. That term, Baba Haridas, will tell anyone this is a holy man, one who's also a steward of that sacred tradition, one who has command over all of what we're talking about. He was in a simple loincloth partly because of the invasion, the economic struggle, but also part of that quality of tyag, renunciation, simplicity. He doesn't need... He was royal, but not... He doesn't need to show it materially. So when they come in with the retinue, they sit down. Akbar gives gifts, gives jewels, the customary types of gifts. It doesn't really affect Baba Haridas. Usually can't butter up someone of that stature. Then he said, your disciple here, Myantan Sen, he has entranced us for so many years, we would love to hear you sing and pay our respects to you. Baba Haridas said, no, I decline. He respectfully declined. He wouldn't sing. Not by the request of the emperor, Akbar. Myantan Sen was clever, and in his mind he thought, how can I get my guru to sing? This is in itself a lot of etiquette and a lot of shastras and many things there. How do I get my guru to sing? I cannot tell him to sing. So he thought he had a brilliant idea. Myantan Sen began to sing a composition that he learned from his guru, Baba Haridas. But he intentionally made a mistake. By making a mistake, he then obliged his guru to correct him. He activated a dharmic commitment, obligatory commitment. So Tansen makes a mistake. Baba Haridas, by his commitment, his vow as guru, stops him and says, my shishya, my son, you have not done it correctly, it must be done this way. And he begins to sing it. And in that moment, when he is singing it to his disciple, Tansen, Akbar's hairs stand up on his arms and he chill and his eyes fill with tears because he realizes not only is this the master, the guru of Tansen, but the way in which he's singing and the motive for his singing was something that he had never experienced to that point, Akbar. He was speechless, and after the composition was finished, he paid his respects. Baba Haridas showed the sign of please leave in a polite way. Thank you for coming, but you can go now. Thank you for your gifts. They exchanged all of their kind gestures and farewells. And as they were riding back in the carriage, both of them were pensive, but perhaps in different ways. We can imagine that the disciple, Tansen, was more pensive. Akbar was elated. He couldn't believe what he just said. He kept saying to him, magnificent, wonderful. Kya baat hai? This was incredible. You will be that. That by seeing your teacher, I can see what you will become someday. That is the promise of the path you're walking. You will be that. You will be as great as your guru. You may even surpass him. Such blessings that you have. But Tansen didn't really respond, and he was a little bit troubled. And Akbar said, why are you not responding to my praise of you? What is your concern? And Tansen looked at him and he said, I will never sing like Baba Haridas Ji. I'll never sing like my guru. He said, why do you say such a thing? Don't speak that way. Why would you say that? And he said, I will never sing like my Guru Dev because he only will sing for God, only sing to God, whereas I must sing for you, for your command. And in that moment, they both had no more to say, and the carriage continued on, both thinking very deeply about what was meant. And that story encapsulates so much of that transition from the temple music to the court music, And we still, to this day, we in this tradition, we bow to music as a divine expression with two different purposes, two different intentions. One for moksha, for liberation, for that divine communion, and another for kama, enjoyment, entertainment, pleasure. But when music is limited only to enjoyment, only entertainment, it will never reach the heights of what sound and music, that experience, can be as moksha, which all of the music traditions lead to. So yeah, it's a very, very special story.
Thank you for sharing that. Now you've brought up the whole concept of the power of music as a transcendent force. And I want to connect it back to the idea of Tansen's ragas were said to be able to bring forth the rain in a sunny sky, or to turn darkness into light. And so I want you to tell us a little bit about the concept of the ragas and in it, how its connection to rasa theory. Bharata Muni wrote the Natya Shastra somewhere between 200 BC and 100 CE. It's the world's oldest and most complete ancient text on dramaturgy. But what makes it remarkable is that he developed the first psychology of emotions. And he developed this idea of rasa, what we call rasa theory in our academic studies. And the concept is, rasa is, of course, taste, savor, flavor, mood, essence. Not mood so much, because that's bhava, but the essence of a thing, the jouissance of a thing. And so he describes, 8 rasas, right? He describes Shringaram, love, passion, attraction. He describes hasyam, laughter, joviality, etc. Rauduram, fury, wrath. Karunyam. Karunyam is, of course, compassion, karuna. He even describes something like vibhatsam, disgust, aversion. And then important rasas like bhayanakam, horror, terror, fear, extreme fear, and viram, the heroic mood, adbhutam, amazement, wonder, awe. And then we have Abhinavagupta, the great Kashmir Shaiva philosopher, who had shantarasa, shantam, that all of the denotes tranquility, unalloyed peace, the peace that passes understanding. And so he creates the Navarasa from the 8 rasas. And what I want to talk to you about or ask you about is, the relationship of the development of raga in music to the rasas.
It's a very profound, has a lot of history, as you said, the Natya Shastras and others. Certainly with the drama portraying the scriptures. So if a company, so to say, was going to recreate scenes of the Ramayana, then of course all of those rasas would be necessary from the Natya Shastra perspective. But for individual experience of music, then it changes, because a devotee isn't going to sit down and sing a song and try to produce fear. But you don't want to have fear. So there are certain rasas that we want to experience. So those have evolved, particularly with this branch into like more entertainment purpose, court music, and then also remaining in these interior experiences of bhakti, of longing. So the rasas evolved into various sounds, but the way that the ragas were divided in these early times created some fixed scales or categories of scales called thats, and within those they branched out. And the raga and the ragini, there's different systems of throughout India of how to divide them, but it's very profound study of how different melodic scales can be categorized and grouped together, and which notes and which combinations of notes might consistently evoke a type of feeling, rasa. So there was tremendous experimentation and research on this for centuries. So in my personal experience, I grew up here in the US and enjoyed music. I love all different kinds of music, but nothing quite matches India's raga tradition, especially when it comes to trying to seek a transcendent, divine, sublime experience. But it's all there. I mean, there are melodies of romance that are unmatched. These are the film songs, the beloved film songs in India that are some of the most popular songs. We just had the Nightingale of India, the Srimati Lata Mangeshkar. She recently left her body on Saraswati Vandana. Her and her sister have recorded more songs than anyone else on the planet. And those film songs have these rasa of joy, of romance, of humor. And so that popularization would be in that category of Sangeet for enjoyment, for entertainment, for our human experience. That also can be used sometime in devotional practice, but there are certain emotions that are really apply more to those internal experience of certain types of ritual or sadhanas, certain vows, certain vrats, that also match certain deities and their bhavas. See, the divine also has bhava. This word bhava is a huge word and concept, and anubhav and vibhav. If we think of Devi, for example, one Devi, in many Shakta traditions, she is one, Adya Shakti. But her different bhavas, her tattva, her principle may change, but the bhav may be one of fierce, but not angry, but fierce, because she's destroying her enemies, but internally she's joyous. That's a very complex human emotion. We wouldn't understand that. It sounds contradictory. So there are certain combinations of rasa and bhav that are very, very, very specific, that are achieved through chanting certain texts, but they're supposed to go in conjunction with a sadhana, with a puja, with a meditation, and that raga, and that rhythm, and that song. And it can create an experience where there's a tremendous fierce power that may seem on the outside as anger, but actually within it is a blissful non-attachment to what's happening. So how can there be ananda and tyag? Well, you won't hear that in a Bollywood film song necessarily. So rasa has a tremendous influence, bhav as well. Rhythm also has a tremendous influence. There are many ragas, some derivatives. One way of looking at it is that the raga and raginis. Ragas are considered to be like lesser, I don't know if we could use the word gods, demigods, goddess. They are in themselves like a form. Some of them even have paintings to try to depict the mood that they convey. And the person who's performing is indebted to recreate that raga in a very fixed way. So if we were to think about painting, for example, if someone said, please paint to me a picture of a deer, that artist has to know the basic structure of what a deer looks like to make sure that it doesn't look like a bear or a camel or a dog. And if I tried to draw a deer, you wouldn't know what it was. I'd have to tell you it's a deer. But the joy of the musical experience to this day in a gathering is no one will say what they're going to do. They will begin to do it. I mean, sometimes they introduce, I'm going to sing rag such and such, but sometimes they just sing it. But slowly they're building the structure, and they have to follow that structure. However, the expectation is that each time they will do it a little differently. So that's the balance of the internal individualistic experience, that, okay, Naren, I have seen you paint a deer 6 times. Every time it was different. Tomorrow I expect you to again paint a deer, but slightly different. Show, and that's the mastery of the great musicians, where they will sing the rag in a way, or perform it with an instrument in such a way that everyone knows that's rag Yaman. Oh, that's Bhairavi. Oh, that's Kafi, without a doubt. Everyone knows it. But they don't want to hear it done in the same way. They want to hear it different. They want the nuance. That is in Raga Sangeet, where raga is predominant. The emotional spectrum is vast. There are so many emotions. They also can correspond with the time of day, the mood of the time of day. So just think for a moment about how a morning makes you feel versus midday versus night, the influence of environment. The seasons as well, the rainy season, it just naturally makes us feel different than the heat of summer. I mean, for those places that have more than 2 seasons, I think we have 2 seasons in California, but if you have the 4, in India there are 6 seasons, including the monsoon. And so there's a whole group of ragas and melodies just for monsoon, just for summer, plus different times of day. It doesn't mean that you can only sing that rag at that time of day or at that season. What it means is that if you properly perform that rag, the listener and yourself will begin to feel as though it is that time of day in that season. And that is where this vibrational sonic tradition becomes so deep to our inner experience, the anubhav of why we sing these songs. Again, we're not just trying to separate ourselves from the performance and say, oh, I'm going to sing you this song, you'll like it. The goal always is that the internal experience begins to affect our own consciousness, our own bhav, and particularly with, in this category of moksha or divine sacred music, it's all there. Joy, sorrow, etc. And in bhakti, emotions are very important, and they are not to be suppressed. This is a very unique characteristic of Bhakti Yoga. Even the great Gyan, Swami Vivekananda, in his Bhakti Yoga treatise, very short, he specifically says that emotions are not to be suppressed. Rather, they are harnessed, they are used and then directed to the divine. And so with that understanding, there's no need for religious music to impose an emotion on a bhakta. So if someone is feeling angry, there are ragas that will connect with that anger and harness that energy of anger and use it maybe for virya, courage, valor, and it'll have a drum beat and a melody that connects with it. Sorrow can become love, viraha, longing. A sort of restless excitement can be transmuted into a form of joy, bliss. So everything can become transcendent, and that's why the variety of raga and rhythm, tala, will has the capacity to connect with any type of emotion. Because of film, because of recording, and because of our sort of instant culture, YouTube culture, a lot of the breadth of that experience has become shrunk into a few popular ragas, a few popular melodies. So rather than 150 ragas, maybe the ones we see the most and hear the most these days is 20 or 30, when there's many more. And so that's good because it's adapting to our present experiences. But I also always encourage everyone to try to explore, to go into some much older, rare, specific rag and chant, to have an experience that may be anew, emotional experience or a new transcendent experience. But yeah, the science of rasa and rag and is so vast, including tala, rhythm. It's very, very specific. I'll add one thing specifically. Many of you know Swami Vivekananda. Certainly you, Dr. Sherma, I met you when you were invited to the Vivekananda Center and given that assignment at USC. Swami Vivekananda ji, not everyone in this country knows that he composed music. He composed sacred songs. And one of his is Nahishur Jo Nahi Jyoti, which is a very, very esoteric description of samadhi in a very Vedantic mood. It would not be considered devotional music at all. But he composed it specifically to Rag Bhageshri and specifically in a Drupad Tala that is in a 10-beat cycle, Japtal, or in a Rupak Tal, 7-beat in both ways. So that just says right there that here is someone who knows, he has in the palate the tremendous knowledge, the knowledge of what samadhi is from his own experience and his textual knowledge, shastric knowledge, plus a knowledge to say, I want to convey that. He could have chosen any raga, but he chose Bhageshri. Why? That's the great exploration. Why? What is it about that raga that connects to an experience such as that? And why did he choose that particular rhythmic structure? And so that gives an insight into how this music is used and the effect of both raga, which is more of the melodic experience, and with tala, the rhythmic experience, that both of those can be a way of expressing something very, very much like something that you can't normally express.
Thank you so much. That was so rich and expansive, and gave us and yet just gave us a glimpse into this vast world that you inhabit and that we seek to transmit. Thank you so much for joining us today. I will just end with a blessing, without chanda, without tala, without raga, but with great bhakti. Om Sarvesham Swastir Bhavatu, Sarvesham Shantir Bhavatu, Sarvesham Purnam Bhavatu, Sarvesham Mangalam Bhavatu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sherma. That was wonderful. Thank you, Panditji. I'm sure we would love to hear you talk more, and we can go on. But this has been such a wonderful conversation. Thank you to all of our viewers for listening. You can find more about Panditji's work and service on www.nivedanam.com. He also has another website which is dedicated to his music, and it's called sangeetayoga.com. And for more information on Dr. Sherma, you can find her on www.ritasherma.com. Thank you very much. I'm your host, Dr. Praveena Rodriguez, signing off. It's been an absolute pleasure. Namaste, everyone.